Good morning. I'm Erin Benham, the chair of the Legislation and Policy Development Committee, and calling our committee meeting to order. First on our agenda is the approval of our minutes.
This is Bonnie, so moved.
Second, this is Malia.
Any changes, discussions? All in favor? Just
Aye.
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 Our next item on the agenda, our only item on the agenda, is our bylaws update that we have seen now for a couple of times. So I'll open it up to the committee members if there are anything that you need to ask questions about. I know, Bob, I'm going to start with you just to make sure we've completed all the areas of the change in the verbiage for the school.
Yes, they're all accurate, and I appreciate that happening. Thank you.
That's great. Any other questions regarding the bylaws?
I do just have Karen. I did have.
Karen, go ahead.
Is it? Yes. In reviewing the functions of the board, I was wondering if there could be a line added. So I am on page. Let's see, are they numbered? I'm on. Okay, so I'm on the.
I will add numbers. That can be our next edit.
Article 4, functions of the board. And then there's a listing of items, A through M. So in reading it, I was wondering if we could call out very clearly an item that would say something like, to formulate policy that advances education equity for all learners in the state. I'm trying to make it a very clear statement in our bylaws around equities. I also am not an expert on writing bylaws, so I'm not sure if that's an appropriate motion addition to make, and I'm certainly open to input around that. But that was my thought.
Okay, I'm going to hand that over to Jessa. Jessa, is that something that would be appropriate to go in here, or is that more for our 5-year plan, which will be in there? But I'll leave that up to you. What do you think?
Sure. I mean, I think, Chair Benham and I actually had a discussion too about a conversation that we had about having an equity committee added as well. And so I think those are both topics for conversation. What I would suggest is if you give me the time to look at what the functions of the board are and perhaps think about, I could make a proposal as to where that might be best suited to fit. And I'm thinking that it could also include, to your point, Chair Benham, reference perhaps to the 5-year plan. So I think it would be appropriate if that is what the board wants to include. But I would just ask that we take a little bit of time to think about where it fits the best. And, while I have the mic, I will also say that we'd have a little bit of time. I think, we've fallen out of the cycle of approving the minutes every 2 years, immediately before I started. And, as indicated in the final article, the bylaws continue forward until modified or rescinded. So we do have a working set of bylaws. We've made a lot of sort of conforming changes in here, but if we want to have a more robust conversation about making that clear that we have this, the commitment to advancing educational equity, that could be a conversation.
Right, and just to add to Jessa's, what I was going to say at the end after we discuss some changes, if in Article 3, Section 3 is what Jessa is referring to, is that every 2-year, odd year update. So we did decide, though, even if now we know we want to already look into changes, so we're not going to move anything forward yet. But we did decide that even when we approve it from this committee, we will wait until that June meeting, which if you read that, it's an organizational meeting. We will wait for that time because it does say shall be action on any proposed bylaws amendments. Instead of bringing amendments to the board and then redoing this in such a short period of time again in June, where by the bylaws we're going to follow this year in 2021 and have that meeting. So I will bring that today during my report that we discussed these bylaws today with the intention that it will be on the June agenda board meeting for an organizational piece. So we will make sure that's in there. So as Justice said, we do have time. And I know, Malia, you had a question as well, or a comment.
My thoughts are in a totally new direction now. So, because I really appreciate the suggestion that was just brought up in terms of making sure that our role on ensuring equity in the state is a focus. And then I was just thinking about then your comment about Erin, or I can't remember who mentioned it, but potentially adding a committee specific to equity. And I sort of fall, having some time here in our agenda, I would love a conversation just about thoughts about that, because sometimes there is the necessity to elevate equity, but sometimes there's the risk of having a separate committee that's focused on that, then sort of gives the impression that it's that committee's issue and it doesn't necessarily need to follow through to the other committees. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just worth a little bit of discussion around that, and whether or not it's actually, if there's actually language or some way in which we are conveying that equity is a piece of each of these committees, right? That they are in service to addressing the equity issues within the state of Connecticut, right? So that's where my new train of thought just went from this conversation.
And that committee was raised by me back in, I think it was our retreat when we discussed this as a full board. And that was brought forward via NASB, that it was one of the discussions I had on my policy group that I belong to, that's a committee that every board should have. And that's why I proposed it. But we did have the discussion sort of right along your lines, Malia. And a lot of the board members at that time were sort of leaning to, well, we'll be redoing our 5-year plan. And definitely that's in there, and certainly will be, as I've had conversations with staff members at the agency, that certainly will be continued. That is not one of the goals that is going to be removed from our 5-year plan, certainly. And saying that too, I should let you know, because this committee often is the committee that gets the updates on our plan. Like last time we had, I think it was goal 1 or whatever the update was that we had last time. I have been told by the department that we do now have a contract with the Center for School Change, who will guide us through our next 5-year plan. So that's going to start rolling. So that you know that. And because I think when we're talking about this equity committee, the bylaws, the plan, it's nice that we're actually all going to start addressing those all at once and try to figure out as a board where we want that to be. So I do want you to know, I don't know if it will be brought up today during the meeting, but I do know that they plan to bring in the chair, the co-chair, and chairs of committees sometime later this month prior to our March meeting to discuss the rollout of our 5-year planning workshops and so forth. So I just wanted to mention that to you, because we are the committee that receives those plans, receives those updates before they go to the board.
Chair Benham, if I just bring something else to the attention of the committee?
Mm-hmm.
I just also wanted to your point, remind you that statutorily, Statute 10.4b, which defines the duties of the board, includes supervision and control of the educational interests of the state. And that 10.4a, which defines the educational interests of the state, starts by saying each child shall have equal opportunity for access to education. And it also explicitly talks about the educational interests of the state to reduce racial, ethnic, and economic isolation, to allow educational opportunities for students and teachers from other racial, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. So I think, again, we can have a conversation about its role in the bylaws and its role as a committee, but I just wanted to confirm that just inherent to the existence of the board and its statutory existence, that, you're right on, that this is part of what we would want to bring to the forefront.
Just, I guess one of the questions I have is right in the first sentence of Article 4, you know, is that someplace where we can put that we act under, you know, inclusion, equity, and incorporate it right in the first sentence? Not that we're going to go into detail about it, because I think, as you say, state statute does that for us. But I think just right in that first sentence to include that, we can't say it enough. And maybe that's a place that we can just, you know, put that into the bylaws, in addition to the 5-year plan, in addition to, you know, other places that we get to, you know, tie that up.
And you're, Bonnie, you're
That's
going the direction that I was just going to say. Only I was going to actually suggest that we do pull in that language from the statute, because very few of us are actually going to go back and look at that statute, right? Like, we're just going to pick up the bylaws if we're going to be totally honest, right? So,
Right.
So I think having that language there, to your point, Bonnie, actually, would be really important.
Yeah, I think that's it. I was thinking that just when you were reading them, that it is, I think it would be important for this case, you know, for a document that's going to stand for, well, at least 2 years, that it's pulled in. It might be a good thing to do. My other question, Justa, to you as well, is that as much as we will finalize these by the June meeting, is this a document that once we start maybe putting in some of these changes that this group discussed today as possible changes, should we really start sharing this document with the entire board versus waiting to that June meeting? I just don't want to see that we get to that and then we have more additions and we keep putting it off. Do you know what I mean?
Let me have a conversation with the commissioners and see if it could be perhaps an agenda item. Obviously, we always need to be cognizant of the fact that public conversation or review would be, you know, something that we need to properly notice under the FOI. So Let me bring that to them. But I think that's a good point. Absolutely.
Even if we could do it through committee, I don't know, like maybe I'll look over it, you know, maybe if it could go to other committees that other board members sit in and is asked for almost a review that in that way. Maybe that's a possibility as well. And then at least all board members have seen it before, you know, because it's a pretty important document, and to wait until June to again say, oh, we really should add this. And they might be great additions that we hear from our other board members. It would be nice perhaps to know them before then and to see them in print as the possibility of a change that we can vote on as a full board. So, but you can let us know on that.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's really important to put that paragraph from the charter or from the legislation into the document before we give it to the board.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Any other comments, Malia?
I do. I did want to circle back to the process of thinking about an equity subcommittee. And maybe you were saying this, but my apologies if I didn't pick it up right. But one thing I think would be helpful for me is you mentioned that NASB was suggesting that this is a committee that folks should have. If they have information about, you know, how those committees then function for other state boards, or their recommendations about what the functions of that particular committee would be, and how it then, I'm assuming it would speak to how it then also intersects with the other standing committees. I think that would just be helpful in helping us think through, is it a standing committee, or is there something that's worked into the actual processes? I just think that would be helpful for us to know.
And I was going to suggest Woody, now being our official liaison to NASB, might be something that you can ask those questions. I know when it was raised, this was quite a while ago because I brought it in the summer, so it was probably last spring is when it was raised. There are the subcommittee I sit on, there's about 11 of us throughout the whole country. I couldn't tell you which ones were talking about their particular, but I guess I bet, Woody, that you could ask that question at NASB and they'd be able to get that information to you.
Sure, I'll do that. And also, I learned recently that Massachusetts has what they call a diversity committee. which has to do with the diversity of their educators, but also internal issues within the department of equity and diversity and consciousness raising and that sort of thing. So I could talk to my contacts there at Massachusetts as well.
Yeah, that would be great to have that information. Just see who has these type of committees and what really what their charge is of the committee.
Right. Yeah.
On the boards.
Yeah, Woody, because I'm assuming is that Massachusetts committee, is it just diversity, or is it diversity, equity, and inclusion? Right? Is it a DEI committee?
Well, yeah. It seems to have to do with programs within the department that have to do with equity and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I learned about it writing the article for NASB about all of our initiatives in diversity of the educator force. And Massachusetts is the state that is on a par with Connecticut and how much they're doing to diversify their educator force.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, discussions?
This is Karen again.
Hi, Karen.
So I had a question, taking us in another direction now. I had a question because just for my own clarity, the first paragraph of functions of the board includes role around preschool, and this is for my own edification. I just wanted to understand what our board's role around preschool is at this point, given the Office of Early Childhood, and just wanted to understand sort of our role in that.
That's a fair question, and I actually thought the same thing when I read it, and I went back to the statute, and the statute does still indicate preschool as the responsibility of the board. However, to your point, my understanding is that there's been substantial responsibility delegated to the Office of Early Childhood as opposed to the SDE. So let me look into a little bit further to make sure that I can clearly answer the question of your role in relation to us having now an OEC commissioner. But I did confirm that the statute at this point does still say that your charge includes preschool, elementary, and et cetera.
Yeah. Language in the bylaws as that gets clarified, because I hate to have things in bylaws that then we're not seeming to address in any way. So if in fact that's been delegated elsewhere, yet stays in our statute, it would be helpful. In this, I don't have any ability to draft the right thing for this, but I suggest Jessa maybe to give us a suggestion of what it should say that sort of makes that clear in our bylaws.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's a legislative item we should be putting forward for an change to that statute to make it clear that those responsibilities sit elsewhere now.
I'm wondering, Jess, I don't know how long ago the statute was in place, but I'm wondering if this is for districts that haven't included preschool in there, like it's preschool through 12, not just K through 12. We have some districts that have full preschools, not many, but we do have some. And I wonder if that's why it's stated here, because they would be considered under the whole umbrella. But if you read this, like Karen says, that doesn't say that. So one would think that it's all preschool. So good question. So it'll be interesting what Jessica.
Yeah, we do have some responsibility for it. Then I would be expecting to get some sort of report or updates or something that would allow us to have done our due diligence around that matter. So I don't want to have it both. Either sort of it should be clarified in our bylaws, or if it does remain a responsibility of ours, then that to me speaks to something that we should be reviewing on some quarterly basis or semi-annual basis or something, if that's part of our purview.
Woody?
I have a similar question in that paragraph where it mentions vocational education. And I thought I heard something some time ago about the technical schools being spun off somehow. And can you clarify that?
Well, they're still connected as of now, correct, Bob?
They are now, and probably even in the future, it's going to, the educational component of it will probably still fall under the oversight of the Board of Education, the State Board of Education.
These are really good questions, and the reason I think they're really good questions is because it is somewhat complex. So what I would propose, if you're comfortable, Chair Benham, is perhaps next meeting we have, I can come prepared to ensure that I can provide a full vision of the different responsibilities of this board, the CTEX board, and Office of Early Childhood. The Office of Early Childhood is a part of the State Department of Education for administrative purposes, but I understand and agree that we should be clear for you where those lines are, and ensure that if you would be interested, that we're providing updates on the portions of early childhood in particular that we are continuing to hold responsibility for.
Yeah, that'd be great, Jessa. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So I guess one of the questions that I would have is, if in fact that preschool and early childhood ed are underneath where we are, is it possible to have Commissioner Bai come and give us a briefing at some point as to what she does in her office? Just because, again, I'm new, and seeing the delineation administratively versus other things that I'm hearing you all talk about, that might be interesting if we find that in fact we still have statutory authority to work with preschool. Just a thought, just because, again, for my edification, I just don't understand the differences between what her office would do and what ours would do.
I like that idea, Bonnie. Even after we get the clarification, that would be a nice person to hear from, actually, to give a good explanation as to the differences and how they conduct their business.
Absolutely. The other thing I can request too is I know Andrea Burnell and our Bureau of Special Education does work with the preschool populations related to special education access. So again, it is, it may be that what we need to do again is just be very clear to parse out which aspects of preschool remain ones that are within the purview of the board and the SDE. And so I can ask perhaps if Andrea can come as well to provide some insight on her perspective as to the role of the Bureau of Special Ed. And also absolutely Commissioner Bai, I can request that she consider providing some update on the role of the Office of Early Childhood. But again, I would just request for me to make sure that I'm providing you accurate information, that we plan to allow me to prepare, for a presentation to provide some clarity around this.
Thanks. Anything else? Okay, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And we have a whole half hour. Go have some coffee, breakfast.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.